Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started here in just a moment. Thank you to everyone who is joining us right at the top of the hour here. We will get started here in just a minute, and we'll hop right into it. Thank you again, everyone who registered, everyone who's joining us right here off the top. We're super excited to be sharing this webinar with you today. So for those of you just joining, we'll give it probably another 30, 45 seconds, and then we'll jump right into our content here today. We have a 30-minute webinar, so we're going to get right into the good stuff as soon as we get most of the folks on the call here, and we'll get started. So again, thank you to everyone who's joining us here right off the top. Great. Well, looks like we have a good amount of folks who have joined us here. So we are going to hop right into it for the sake of time here. So again, welcome to everyone who's joining us here. Thank you for registering for this webinar. As you all know, we're going to be focusing on how to migrate your CPQ to Logik in just minutes. We've been working on these capabilities to help make CPQ migrations simpler to Logik for quite a while now, and we're just scratching the surface of what we're really planning in terms of our roadmap of Migrate here today, but we're excited to show you what we have. So let's get right into it. We'll start off, just want to introduce everyone to our panelists. My name is Blake Grubbs. I'm our head of marketing here at Logik. I'll be hosting, and I'm joined here by both Fazil and Praveen from our product team. Fazil is kind of the mastermind behind this Migrate product and mastermind behind most of the Logik product as well. Fazil has a ton of experience from his days at Oracle CPQ. He's one of our co-founders here at Logik, so he'll be managing the demo here today. And we also have Praveen on the call, who's our other mastermind behind Logik and Logik Migrate, who's joining us from India today. Praveen has a ton of experience both at Salesforce and with Salesforce CPQ, so he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to those solutions as well. So we have an awesome panel here today. Just to talk about the agenda for a moment, we're going to be focusing on a Logik Migrate demo for the large part of this. So we're going to actually have a timer up on my screen where we're going to be timing a Logik migration here today. We're then going to just talk about, hey, why should you upgrade to Logik for CPQ in the first place? We'll talk about the specific migration challenges that this particular capability solves. And then we'll take a little bit of time to talk about what's next for Logik Migrate as well. A couple quick housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded. You will receive a recording within the next 24 hours. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We will go and save questions for the very end. We'll make sure to save some time to answer your questions at the very end. But please feel free to put them in the Q&A box throughout. So with that said, we're going to get right into it. We're going to start with the good part. We're going to get ready to migrate here in just a moment, just so we're all on the same page on what we're about to see. What we're going to look at here today is how Logik Migrate makes it super, super easy, super, super cost effective, super, super fast to translate and transfer your data from your existing CPQ. In this case, we're going to focus on transferring it from Salesforce CPQ into Logik, right? So for this demo here today, we're going to show you how we do that with product bundles, product rules, and custom objects. Super excited to hop right into it. So without further ado, I will pass it to Fazil here. We'll get our timer queued up in just a moment after Fazil sets us up. But super excited to get right into it. So Fazil, I will pass it over to you. Fazil, you are on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Blake. I will go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. Thanks, Blake. So as Blake said, welcome everyone. I do appreciate people joining us from all over the globe in different time zones and learning about Logik Migrate. So before I started the actual migration process, I wanted to give you guys some flavor of what we will be migrating, just walking through some of the sample entities. So there are a few actual product bundles we'll be migrating. One of them will be the laptop, 13-inch laptop. So I wanted to show what that looks like for somebody who set it up in Salesforce CPQ. So this is a pretty typical kind of a bundle you might have in Salesforce CPQ. You're trying to sell a laptop, which might have a processor. You can have some quantity of memory. You can buy 8 GB or 16 GB RAM, and you can buy some storage, which could be SSD storage or things like that, and you could add that to the code, right? So similar kind of bundles is what we will be migrating. Just to give you a sneak peek, some of the items within this bundle. So this is a Salesforce CPQ bundle currently. It has configuration rules. It has different features as well as options set up in it already. Within that, you also have product option, like this product option 009 of memory. It has a min and max quantity. So there are actual more business constraints you might have around how much you can buy of a certain product, certain option. And we also have certain rule. This is one of those rules we have defined around the memory constraint that you can only choose 8 GB RAM or memory for right now for this setup. So that's all the configurator part. And another thing which I'll talk about later on in the demo roadmap as well, we have also worked on letting you migrate any custom objects you might be looking at. So this is one custom object which many Salesforce CPQ customers, as they've set up their configurations or quoting, they will have custom objects to look up data. This is one of those custom objects we are using called laptop bomb dummy data. It has typical fields you can have in your extended bill of material. So when you're sending the laptop for fulfillment, you might need to choose other components which are children of your sales line item. And that information, how can we move that to Logik also automatically, is what we will be showcasing. So at this point, now that you guys know what we have, and also so that you know I'm not doing a hand wavy demo, it's a real demo. I'll give you a sneak peek of the Logik environment, and you can see there are no fields, there are no rules, there are no tables, and there are no blueprints right now. So we'll pray to the demo gods, we'll do the demo, and we'll see how this goes. So now I introduce you to Logik Migrate. So this is a product which we have set up. And as you can see, it's a productized way of thinking about migration process, which is not common in the CPQ space. We have bundle, custom object, and product rules, at least right now as standard connectors available. And if I was to start a migration, I could say, I want to do the webinar demo, just to name a migration. I can choose what are the things which I want to migrate. Once I've chosen that, the process begins, and it's an actual guided visit. So I can choose to link it to my source environment, which in this case, we have configured a connection to a Salesforce environment with the user which has access to these objects. I can similarly choose the Logik connection, which is targeting the Logik environment where you want to move this data to, which is the empty environment we had. And as I go next, at this point, Migrate magic is kicking in. So what we are showing you right now are actually the dynamic data which is being pulled from that Salesforce source environment. So what are the bundles? We have already configured the endpoints so that we know how do we look up the bundles, the information within the bundles. So you have your features, options, you can see it for different products. You can choose to migrate only specific things if you wanted to, especially if you're doing recurring migration. And right now, I'm just going to choose all the bundles I want to migrate. So, we'll see how the scaling happens. Next, we get to custom objects. So this is where we get down to custom objects, which you may want to migrate, you may want to use for rules as well as for other purposes when you start moving to Logik. And as I go through the custom object, I can give it a different name if I wanted to, which can be the table in Logik. And I have more control because you might have extra fields in your custom objects, which you may not really care about. But when you're moving it to Logik, you can easily choose which fields makes most sense, are going to be most relevant. So for doing this for the sake of demo, I'll define about 4 fields. So it looks somewhat realistic. And this also gives us some meaningful data which we are able to migrate. And I'm going to choose the last one as unit of measure. I'm going to make all of them text. And now I have chosen my columns, and I can map them to actual fields, which are again dynamically being pulled from the custom object in Salesforce. So to see what do I need to map this to for the fields I've defined. So I can choose to map product. I can choose to map the unit of measure field, which can have different names, and I can map it to my component. And then I go next, and now we are fetching all the product rules you have defined in the Salesforce environment as well. Again, you can inspect some of the details here. We'll keep adding more and more details for the admin to know which rules they really want to migrate. And for this purpose right now, I'll just select all the rules, which are all the 39 rules which are going to get migrated right now. So at this point, I'm good to go with my migration. I've set it up. I can review the different things which I've decided to migrate. And if I like it, I can begin the migration. And now the migration is going on. You will see there's an actual migration process which has kicked in. It is actually starting to go through the process of looking at all these entities and migrating them. And whether it's first, it will migrate the tables, it will migrate your features, your options. We'll also actually create a default layout and deploy some of the sample blueprints so that you can actually see what the end user experience looks like even before you look at all the admin details, which I'll show you in a minute as well. So at this point, we are almost done. If we wanted to take a look at what the Logik environment might be looking like, there is some information which is getting created in real time. So you can see I actually have my tables created. I have my fields created. I have started to see rules as well. And if I look at the migration now, it should be getting to 100%. So at this point, the migration is done, right? And if I go back to now my Logik environment, I will see that I also have blueprints. So before I get into what this migration looked like, there are a couple of key things which I think are worth noting. So as I said, we are not trying to do fake demos. We believe in real demos. And as a result of that, we know not everything goes perfectly all the time, right? Migration processes are complicated, which we'll explain today. So we also generate a status report. So you can actually see what happened during this migration. And this will have all the entities you have migrated. We'll tell you what could not be migrated. As in this case, there was actually a feature which we could not migrate because that product had a conflict. So when we tried to create that variable name, it didn't work. Custom object worked, and some of the rules didn't work. And whatever errors we could generate, we actually generated. So the admin can actually take manual action also faster, and onboarding is faster. So let me show you guys what the end user side would have will look like for, let's say, the laptop, 13-inch laptop product, which we saw before. So this is actually the default layout we created, which already has the processor, memory, and storage options created for you. I can choose to add my processor quantity or storage quantity, sorry. I can choose to define my memory. And not only we created the fields and you can make the selections, but if I was to choose 16 GB, if you recall, I told you 16 GB wasn't allowed because of a product rule that has actually successfully migrated. So you cannot create an invalid configuration post the migration either because we have already migrated the rules. And we have also applied more granular rules around min and max quantity. So if I go, let's say above the 5 quantity, it all automatically resets back because we also have migrated that the quantity min and max is not there. As you can see, the message is going to be more auto-generated. That's why the variable names are going to be more unique. But that's part of the beauty of migration because you need to make some decisions to really make it automatic. So towards the last part of the demo, I do want to at least give you guys a sneak peek on what we did, because the real magic of migration is not the fun of end user side. It's actually what happens in the admin, right? So if I look at this blueprint, which I had, this 13-inch blueprint, which I showed you on the end user side, already had fields associated with it. We created product pickers, which some of you who know about Logik know is a very powerful feature, which maps pretty nicely to bundles and to features and options. So if I go to the memory product picker, you can see I can see my options. I can have the right values and the names which I wanted to give. I can have the fields which I might need to represent for quantity as well as selection. And I even have my rules, the bulk action rules, where the min-max quantity was coming in. If I was to look at related rules, I have this product validation rule, which is actually fairly interesting. And this is where the magic of migration is important to understand. It's not like we have recreated the exact Salesforce CPQ data model, but the translation from that data model to our condition and action and attribute-based configurator format is actually what we are doing, right? So we can actually generate a format or a construct which makes sense in the world of Logik and ultimately gives you that power of the Logik configurator. So you got all of those created. We generated the default layout, as I talked about, which you can tweak further. And we also created that table, which has all the 4 columns, which had about 250 rows. And we have tested it for even larger and larger numbers as well, about thousands and tens of thousands we can migrate. So this is all the pieces of what we started with, how we did the migration, and what we created. So I'll pass it back to Blake so that we can continue further, but hopefully that made sense.
Awesome. That was great, Fazil. And just before I bring the slides back up, you can see my timer up here, right? 3 minutes and 37 seconds from the time that Fazil actually entered the migration app to when all the data was migrated. So pretty quick there. I'm going to leave that up because that's pretty awesome. So I'm gonna pull up some slides, but I'm actually gonna also fast forward to some of the questions here. Just a clarifying question, Fazil, was that UI that you showed, the end user UI, was that created just automatically by Logik when you did that? That was one of the questions that just came in as you were demoing.
Yes, that is correct. So we have a default template. We are going to have a library of default templates, which we will choose from based on how much data somebody is migrating. And we will create a default template so that the users can play with it right after migration.
Perfect. Perfect. Cool. And I see other questions coming in that we'll get to in just a moment here. Just before we get into it a little bit more, we're gonna talk a little bit about the roadmap for Logik Migrate and what else we're planning here. But just to take a step back for a second, Fazil, can you talk a little bit about, you've seen a ton of these CPQ migrations over time, right? And folks looking to upgrade their CPQ. Can you tell me a little bit about like what typically goes into this process? What typically makes it so challenging, right? We did have a comment that came into the chat that said, "Hey, migration isn't as simple as something that you can time with a stopwatch, right?" So tell me a little bit about typically what makes this process so complex.
Makes sense. By the way, I do agree with the comment, right? It takes time to do these things, but this is where we think we can help take the right first steps to actually achieve that vision, because migration and all these processes are complicated. So to Blake, to your point, at least with my experience in the CPQ space and with multiple CPQ products, two key things I think really make migration really hard. So number one is just the way different applications have been architected in the CPQ world. They are fairly diverse. So some of them tend to be relational, some of them tend to be more attribute based, some of them tend to be more product led configuration based. So they're just the basic terminologies and the basic taxonomy doesn't match, right? So that creates a little bit of a esoteric situation to migrate. But the second, which is probably the bigger reason, is there is a lot of inconsistency. So to the point in the chat, yes, it is not easy to migrate because the way people think about their CPQ processes, there is a lot of different ways people do it. They do a ton of customizations. So when you think about building a lot migrate like platform, there's actually a lot more engineering you have to do to think about how to match things to the best effort. So the stopwatch part would be more automation because you are trying to make a best effort to migrate a good percentage of it, and then some percentage will be left probably to be done still manually.
Got it. Thanks, Fazil, for going through that. One of the things that I also just wanted to go and address here quickly, because we had a couple questions about this in the chat as well. Just in terms of, to take another step back, like what is Logik? Why should you migrate to Logik in the first place? One of the comments said, "Hey, we know that Logik has an awesome configurator, but are you guys a full CPQ?" The answer is yes, we do have a full CPQ, but we also are still a configurator for both Salesforce CPQ and for Salesforce RLM or Revenue Cloud or whatever they're calling it nowadays. But just to make sure that we're zooming out here and looking at why exactly you should think about upgrading to Logik for either full CPQ or to augment your existing solution with our powerful configurator. It starts with our composability, right? Like I was just talking about, we've really built the solution to be seamless and be able to play with any of your current systems. We built it that way from the start. Like I mentioned, we do have end-to-end CPQ capabilities and a flexible approach to those. We have a ton of focus on AI, which we'll be talking about a lot more in the coming months, as well as we're building some really cool things with AI to build on top of what we've already built there. Frictionless point and click admin. Our time to go live and our time to introduce new products and introduce updates is really, really fast. And we have some amazing customer stories that hit on that. And then just the ability to be customer centric, I think, is something that we bring to the table quite a bit. So to bring it back to the beginning, yes, you can use Logik for full CPQ. Yes, you can still use Logik as a configurator to augment your existing Salesforce CPQ and Salesforce RLM solution if you want as well. So I'll pass it back to you, Fazil. Wanted to just kind of take a couple minutes here before we hop into questions to just kind of summarize what we talked about here with migration and talk a little bit about what's on the roadmap, because there's a handful of questions around, hey, where are we going with this? What other systems can we play with? And how far can we push this? So I'll pass it back to you here.
Makes sense. And to Blake's point, one thing I wanted to add, as you think about a solution like Migrate, as we are a composable solution, the modules of Migrate, which help you to adopt one or more products from Logik, is how we think about it. So if you are even thinking of looking at RLM as a platform, as you're moving from Salesforce CPQ to Salesforce RLM, this gives you an optionality to consider what you want to do with the configurator, which will work with either. So that's something to keep in mind, because I know there is a lot of choices in the market, and I welcome people to consider what choices make sense to them. So to coming to this slide, I just wanted to recall, because we did that migration in about 3 minutes. What did we really do, right? So we showed that one-click migration to migrate the things which we understood well, and we could migrate automatically, which had 3 key milestones in it. So we connected to the right environments. You can choose from one to many environments. That's how the system is set up. You will be able to choose what artifacts you want to migrate, and you will see that list of artifacts growing. I'll address what we are planning to do in the roadmap on the next slide. And you are able to then review what got migrated, both in the form of a document and an actual environment, and play with it. And the goals or the KPIs we target is how do we avoid things which are obvious. So to the point, there is always the 80-20 rule. 80% of the things are actually manageable to be mapped if somebody puts thought into it, and which is what we have done. So we can migrate that 80% of those artifacts which are obvious, which avoids the boring work, which is where typically users make mistake. Like somebody forgot an option, somebody forgot a dependency. We can actually calculate that. That's easier for a system to calculate, which is why it is going to be more accurate. And ultimately, it gives you that faster ROI, which in my mind has always been a dream never realized in the world of CPQ, where people buy software as a service, but they go through years of implementation and not even be successful. Ability to onboard quickly, I think, is the true potential of SaaS, which is what we want you to realize as you invest in a product like Logik. Next slide. So this is just to highlight the things we migrated today. This is the list of bundles, features, and I highlighted what are the things we more automated and what are the things we are still working on. This list I'll highlight in the roadmap further. And one of the things I did want to call out was we did not unlink the product from Salesforce CPQ. That's why I showed you an independent screen to see the configurator, because that is an intentional step. You don't want to just magically move your users to a new platform until an admin has validated it. So that's why that linking to that Salesforce CPQ environment, we left that to be just one checkbox you have to click, and then you can link those products just to the migrated Logik configurator. So if I go look at the picture where we are going, as I said, there is a reason we chose to do this as a product, not as just a separate exercise in implementation, because we believe we can build something which can solve a lot of that problem in an engineering-led manner. So we are starting with Salesforce CPQ. I showed you today few of the artifacts we have already built, and they're ready for customers to try. We are welcoming those customers to join the program and see how this works for their own data sets. We are working on the pricing rule portion as well, because a lot of times configuration has a combination of pricing and product rules. So we already have those artifacts which are in development. We are also working on code calculator plugin. So to the point, like, migrations take time. One of the key challenges is those customizations, which are loosely in form of some code or scripts in many platforms. Migrating those is typically the hard problem, right? But as you guys have probably been seeing, folks who are tech savvy, large language models and AI actually make it possible. And we as a company have invested in AI for quite a while. So we understand what those capabilities are. And we are able to leverage that to even translate something like a code calculator plugin, which is a fairly advanced scripting you can write in Salesforce CPQ, into Logik rules and even advanced actions on the Logik side. So with that, that's part of the reason we are claiming what we can do with migration. We are going to give you more control also on migrating the code metadata, the code line metadata, if you decide to look at Logik's transaction manager to get your full CPQ solution from Logik. And we are not stopping there. In parallel, we are also productizing something we have done with a few of our customers already, where when you cut over to a new CPQ platform, you have to handle your active quotes, your active subscriptions. So what do you do with them? Today, we have customers who have done that with Logik, that over a weekend, they did the implementation to cut over, move those things, and automatically start using the Logik configuration for their Salesforce. We are going to productize that portion as well, which gets complicated because every customer has some variety and variability in the data. But we believe we have a general framework now to be able to move all their real-time store active quotes as well to Logik so that your sales team doesn't face that disruption. Now, where are we going next? The way I look at it is we are building the foundation. Next thing is actually growing that foundation to cover other sources, right? So we know we have a lot of manufacturing customers who use sales SAP variant configurator today, right? And when you think about front office and e-commerce, some of those things tend to be very slow to be exposed to those channels. So we are looking to provide an automation which will allow you to think about SAP VC, all the elements in that, like characteristics, scripting, which you can do there, Superbomb, and moving that into Logik. Again, we understand the framework now, so we'll be able to expand there. We will be doing more AI assisted migration because we understand AI. So how do we help users give us their feedback, what is working, what may need to be tweaked, and how the system learns. So Logik Migrate actually will have that capability as well, that it will actually grow as you do more migrations and as we do more migrations. And we'll expand to more spreadsheets so that even for first time CPQ buyers, if they've been working with spreadsheets today, they can grow and use Logik faster and they can onboard and go live faster. We'll expand then to Oracle CPQ side and probably other CPQ platforms, depending on the feedback we get from the market and which customers we are working with. But we are not stopping there. As I said, for us, this is a vision to build the first onboarding and adoption platform which CPQ space hasn't seen. And we will use it for ourselves too. So as you are living your journey with Logik and growing with Logik, how do you move data between Logik environments? We believe this framework will help you do that in a more efficient manner using the tools of your choice for continuous integration, continuous deployment like GitHub, but you will have a tool which will complement that very well. At the same time, if we decide to give you new features which you want to take out, again, you might have seen with Logik, we release hundreds of features. We are a fairly innovative company. We live innovation, our core value every day. So as we release more features and you want to adopt them faster, we will be able to help you move your data, both stored configurations and your admin metadata onto new features as well. So think about something like a field grid to a product picker or a pick list extension to a product picker for people who know Logik. So there's a lot more there. I'm passionate about it, but those are some of the things we are thinking about, Blake.
Awesome. Thank you, Fazil. And I think you answered a lot of the questions that were coming into the chat over the last few minutes, just around kind of like where we're taking the product, what other products that we'll be able to migrate to and from. So thanks for rolling through all that. A couple of quick questions I wanted to get to, and I know we just have a couple minutes left here. So for any questions that we don't get to, we'll make sure to follow up with each of you individually after this to address any questions that you have, just to make sure everyone knows that we'll get to your question in one way or another here. We had one question come in, Fazil, specifically around, the question was like, do you need to create any type of like custom recipes, so to speak, for the migration from other systems, or is it just standard mappings that you're defining as you go through? And I know you showed some of like the customization that you have in terms of field mapping, but maybe you can just hit on that for a couple seconds.
Correct. Yeah, so the answer is it's a combination of the two. So when you will look at Migrate, the things which are pretty straightforward, one way to think about this is there is a data model. It's generally a mapping exercise. So we will actually give you the experience to do that mapping and you can still control that. Then the second part is we are actually providing the framework behind it, right? So if you want to change the flow a little bit, you can think about a flow builder kind of an experience, which is part of Logik Migrate. So if you're migrating something which is very specialized to your business, right? You have all these things which are disparate, you'll be able to still define and leverage the Logik platform to migrate it into target entities. So think about multiple objects might be mapping to this one entity in Logik. How would you do that? We'll actually give you those controls as well. And it will allow you to write even more advanced constructs if you needed to.
Got it. Perfect. Another question here that I'll just handle. Two questions that came in a couple times here. Does Logik support e-commerce capabilities? Yes, because we're composable, headless API first, you can extend to any selling channel that you're selling through. So the answer is yes there. A few questions in here about subscriptions and the ability to support subscriptions. Short answer is yes, we can support that, and we're doing a lot more to continue to support that in new and innovative ways that you'll start to see us continue to talk about as we go into the new year. So, stay tuned for more on that. Another question here that we had, Fazil, was, hey, during a migration, if some of those artifacts pass through, some of that data passes through and fails, if the reason for that failure is then addressed, will the remigration then recreate all the artifacts that go and get pushed through, or can you individually go and select just those failed artifacts that you go and correct?
So you can individually choose which artifacts to migrate. We actually support repeated migration, right? So I understand you will not delete or you'll not have an empty environment all the time. So our API set actually already supports the constructs of upserts. So that allows you to do a lot more repeated migrations. So if something fails, you can try again after you fix it.
Got it. Perfect. Okay, well, we are just a minute over time here. There's a couple questions that we didn't get to, and we'll make sure that, like I mentioned, that we will follow up with each of you individually after this webinar. So we'll get you answers here within the next 24 hours. But thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it. Really great turnout, really great engagement in the chat. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Fazil and Praveen, first of all, for building this awesome product. Like, I think the excitement in the chat that we're seeing here and just the excitement we're getting from the market is really awesome. So thank you both for building this product and for presenting here today. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with us. And we'd be happy to chat. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.